You describe tail risks like earthquakes. You don't know exactly when they're going to hit, but you can reinforce your building ahead of time.
The world that we live in is not straight. The rate of change itself can change, which means that you cannot just react to events that are happening.
It took us 250 years to get to 7 trillion in debt, 06, 07. Now we're at 37. It's growing exponentially.
We're abusing our privilege. Stuff that happened last week or last month is creating new stuff today that will create further new stuff tomorrow. To me, the question, Charlie, is not whether it's destined, like the Greeks and so on, for ultimate implosion. Really, question is over what time scale and what time horizon.
I want to go back to, how you created your wealth. And I know like 10 years ago, you ditched Wall Street's corporate giants, you start your own firm, Longtail Alpha, and boom, 2020 hits and your fund makes like a 900% return. Walk us through, what did you see coming that nobody else saw? Or what is it about what you do that allow you to capture that market volatility when there's an earthquake in the market?
I mean, part of it is timing, but part of it is also very large secular moves that are happening, right? So we have a chart in our deck that shows basically three modern periods, right? So the first period is from the 1960s to the 1980s. So the 1960s to the 1980s was a period of rising inflation, central banks that were behind the yield, behind the curve. They were sort of slow to raise rates, and policy was not credible. And of course, there were things like oil shocks and all that. And so there was a period of increasing volatility, a lot of illiquidity, and diversification didn't really work very well because stocks and bonds both moved in tandem. And stocks and bonds, as you know, are basically the two building block pillars of most portfolios. Bonds give you yield, and bonds tend to move up in price, low in yield when stocks move down. That negative correlation has existed from the 1980s. My first period goes from 1960 to 1987. Yields went to 14%, and there was a lot of inflation, and nobody believed that inflation was ever going to go away. Then Paul Volcker came and started raising interest rates and so on, and we got a 30-year period of exactly the mirror image opposite, right? So falling yields, falling inflation, falling volatility, correlation worked, diversification worked, and you got credibility, you got a peace and quiet dividend, so to speak. And I believe that somewhere in 2016, 2017, certainly in 2020, to me, that COVID episode was an acceleration rather than a regime change of something that was going to happen anyways. This went negative, right? Just 4 years ago in Germany, yields were at negative 70 basis points. You would actually lend the German government money and you would pay them a coupon or an interest every month. I mean, who does that? Who lends money for the privilege and pays for the privilege of lending somebody? Anyway, that's where we were about 3 or 4 years ago. So what this firm is based on, my current mandate, and that's why I left in 2015, 2016, among some other things that were going on at PIMCO at the time as well, was this idea that sooner or later, this 30-year cycle is going to reverse, and we're going to enter a period of rising volatility, rising inflation, breakdown in correlations, breakdown of diversification. And that's what we call basically an environment which is a low probability, high severity, fat tail type of environment. So the firm started in 2015, and all we do, that hence the name of this firm, Longtail Alpha, is we are basically positioning ourselves for large moves in the market, whether it's to the left side, meaning downside, or to the upside, and long tails, right? So some of it is timing, some of it is secular, and then this framework that I described, the best way to take advantage of it is to be long volatility. What does that mean? That generally you're buying some sort of option, whether explicit, meaning options on the S&P 500 or currencies or bonds or something like that, paying premium to get an asymmetric risk reward, or you're trying to find structures or strategies that have that inbuilt asymmetry. So our whole philosophy here is to try to think about the world in this framework of asymmetry, long optionality, and own the optionality cheaply. And, of course, for me, it's worked out really well, being an option trader and being on Wall Street and then being at PIMCO and working with, legends like Bill Gross and Mohammed El-Arian and all those people and a great group of other peers. I believe that we are at a point now where some of these moves are beginning to happen, like we've seen, and are going to just accelerate.
Wow. And you just mentioned working closely with legends like Bill and Muhammad,
Yeah,
literally
yeah,
Wall Street royalty. What's the
yeah.
most important lesson or piece of advice you learned from these guys? It still
I,
kind
yeah.
of guides you today.
I think it's to be extremely client focused first. I mean, Bill always
Mhm.
used to say, the clients are the ones who are paying our bills, and being very humble. I mean, you don't get everything right for sure. I know this after 35 years of doing this. You get a lot of things wrong, but you just got to be extremely disciplined, and you've got to be extremely honest with yourself, right? You can't forecast the markets, but you can forecast yourself. And financial markets and ultra running, they're so uniquely similar and aligned. It's all about self control and it's about self management. So, probably the most important thing I've learned from not just the two of them, but many others, colleagues and peers and other great investors, is this complete adherence to just being honest with yourself. Once you start fooling yourself, the market has no pity. The market does not know who you are. It's going to take you to the cleaners. So you just have to really try to see the way it is. Yeah.
So, Veneer, I keep hearing the word convexity
Yeah.
tossed around. You describe tail risks like earthquakes. You don't know exactly when they're going to hit, but you can reinforce your building ahead of time. Can you dumb this down for us a bit? And what does it really mean for regular investors?
Yeah. So convexity mathematically, and I mean, there's a analog, which is why this term is thrown around so much in finance.
Mhm.
But if you think of, just like a straight line has upward or downward slope, right? And you can just look at it. And once you know the slope of this line, you basically know everything about this line, right? And that's the equation of the line that every algebra student, like my son, is learning right now, my middle son. But then you look at a curved line, and a curved line, you not only need the slope, but you also need the rate at which the slope itself is changing. Now, to think about this concept, that's what convexity is, the rate of change of the slope. So what does that mean in the context of financial markets? What it means is that the world that we live in is not straight, and it is extremely nonlinear, so very curved like that. When stuff starts to happen, network effects, illiquidity, behavior, all of these things conspire to make the rate of change actually itself change quicker and quicker and quicker. So you cannot just react uh, in time, right? So think about your little ant sitting on the straight line, and you start moving on the straight line, the first straight line. Yeah, once you moved a little bit, oh, I know what's going on here. I just maintain my speed, and I have now figured out how this world works. I'm just going to be on the straight line forever. Perfect. It works like that. But when you're in a exponentially growing curve or in a convex curve, just knowing your local rate of change is not enough, because the rate of change itself can change, which means that you cannot just react to events that are happening. You have to plan in advance. So tail risk management and hedging and all the stuff that we specialize in is this idea that you can somehow create portfolios which have this convexity, this curvature, rate of acceleration built in from the beginning. So you don't have to react in the heat of the moment and say, well, what do I do now? Right? April 2nd, Liberation Day. If you were reacting then after the meltdown, it was too late, and you're apt to make a mistake. If you sold, you made a mistake. If you bought, you probably made a mistake as well, because you just don't know what was going to happen. You had to be prepared.
Right.
Uh, so that's effectively what we're
So
doing.
I want to talk about a convexity that I think about often, and that is, it took us 250 years to get to 7 trillion in debt. I don't know, oh
Yeah,
06, oh 07. Now we're at 37 and
yeah,
it's growing exponentially. And
yeah.
now, Trump wants to fire Powell and lower interest rates, which is going to be more cocaine to the market, more debt. I mean, how do you see this ending? I mean, maybe Bitcoin, they buy a million Bitcoin and it hits 21 million in 21 years, like Michael Saylor says, and that'll pay off the debt. But other than that, I just don't see it.
Well, so this is interesting. You mentioned Turkey. I was just actually in Greece for multiple birthdays for 10 days, and I did a lot of reading about Greece, and I've never really spent a lot of time reading and visiting all these amazing places in Greece. Highly recommended, by the way. And what resonated with me is, I mean, this civilization 5,000 years ago ruled the world, right? And it had the Acropolis, and it had built these unbelievable structures and the way of democracy and so on. But somehow that system just got too big, and there was a system implosion, whether it was because of debt or expansiveness or territorial, whatever it was. That civilization effectively died and imploded, and then the Ottomans and then the Dutch and then the British. I mean, so history is full of very important countries, regions, civilizations, sovereigns that have lasted for, 5, 6, 700, maybe 1,000 years in some cases,
Yeah.
in the Greek case. America's only been on top for about 100 years really here. And yes, this deficit is a problem, this debt is a problem, and maybe this is going to be the end of this hegemony, maybe. Um, I do think it's not immediate personally. And the reason is that we are so reliant on the US dollar that it is our privilege right now. We're abusing our privilege, right? As
Yeah, we are.
is 37 trillion of debt, which will go to 50, which will go to 100, which will probably go to 200, is because we have the strongest military and we've got probably the only strong military, and we have the only reserve currency right now. So to me, the question, Charlie, is not whether it's destined, like the Greeks and so on, for ultimate implosion. Really, question is over what time scale and what time horizon. And I kind of have to say, I don't think it's immediate. It's probably, hopefully, not in my lifetime.
Another exponential growth that I don't think people have their hands around. I don't think there's any way the Fed, they're using data and analytics from the 60s, and that's artificial intelligence.
Sure.
The exponential growth of where we are today versus a month ago versus a year ago, and where we're going to be a year ahead of this, and how companies are going to be increasing profit margins at the expense of labor. Never in history has a change happened this quickly that supposedly labor is going to somehow readjust itself. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I mean, that the network effects have a habit of accelerating growth much faster than you can imagine, right? And I think to the point that you're making, stuff that happened last week or last month is creating new stuff today that will create further new stuff tomorrow, unless you are on top of it, and nobody can be on top of it continuously. That's why machines and AI is so important right now. You're just not going to be able to figure out the next big innovation. I do believe, and maybe this is more hope than belief, I do believe that ultimately humans have a power. Maybe we're going to some philosophical regimes here, but I think humans have a power at some point to say that having humanity on this whole thing actually does matter. It doesn't mean you stop the pace of technological progress. How do we actually do it so that we don't lose touch of what's most important? Right. So a great image always comes to my mind whenever I talk about this topic is my two golden retrievers. Right. So they're at home. Right. They are sitting looking at the beach while I'm working and my wife is working and my kids are in school, and the retrievers are just sitting out there snoozing all day long, and they get fed their food. And I mean, they have a pretty damn good life. And,
Yeah.
we are like their AI, right? We're like going to work to provide for these dogs. And all they have to do is wake up and, give us a few tail wags and a couple of licks. In the long run, human beings think that that level of comfort is something that you can aspire to, where you don't have to do anything and maybe machines will do everything. But I don't think that's where everybody wants to go. I think deep down, we all want to actually, do stuff and be fulfilled by doing, important work. So I think that's maybe the redeeming feature to all of this technological innovation is that I think deep down people want to do hard things willingly and achieve something, which makes it fun and interesting for
Right.
most of us.
Well, one more
Yeah.
question about your business,
Yeah.
which is really, creating alpha with tail risk and thinking about risk, but buying essentially portfolio protection is like getting car insurance, life insurance, something nobody likes paying for until they actually need it.
Yeah.
Why is it so hard for people to think that way with their investments? Is it human nature, psychology? What's going on there? And how do you raise institutional money from people that don't like paying for insurance?
Yeah, so there are many different ways. I mean, so so what you're hitting on is this idea where you pay a fixed premium to get very reliable, quote unquote, insurance against your portfolio. And I'll talk about that in just 1 minute. But then there's also other ways of doing it, indirect, cheaper, but not as reliable ways, right? So your choice is get very reliable insurance where you pay a premium that in the short run is a cost, but in the long run actually adds to portfolio benefits. And April was a great example where having hedged, your portfolio was up and the value of your hedge was up. So you had a double win, and you could have sold some of the options and hedges and bought assets on the cheap, which would have now compounded, right? So there's a way of doing it systematically, but that requires a longer term view, a path dependent view of how you construct portfolios. But myopically speaking, when people look at the portfolio and they look at insurance, what happens is, and there's very famous work by Richard Thaler and others in behavioral finance, which basically says that when you get packages, let's say gift packages on Christmas, you get a big gift and a small gift, or you get a big gift, or you have a loss on something else. The losses always seem large. For whatever reason, our mind partitions it in different accounts. And when you combine things, if they are separated, you have gains and losses. Losses will always loom larger, even though they're small in magnitude. So even though the insurance premium is very small, call it 1% a year, when you think it at itself, why am I paying 1% a year? You don't think about something like that for your car insurance or for your home insurance, especially living in Florida. You're living on the coast of Florida, hurricane risk, or out here in California with earthquake risk. What you say is, well, I'm living in this house. And remember the fires in LA? If I'm going to live here, I better have insurance because that's my cost of doing business. That's the reason why I can live in Malibu Canyon or I can live on the coast of Florida. That mindset has not quite resonated with everybody. Now, there are some forward-thinking people that we work with, but generally people say you can be a better investor if you have something like that. You need to combine that combination. Is slowly making inroads, and that's part of the reason I love what I'm doing, is because other than making money and making alpha and all that education to me is very, very important. It's almost like, if you remember, Charlie, 15 or 20 years ago, just using a rough analogy here, when the whole idea of electric cars came out, people said, electric cars? Oh my God, that's going to suck. It's going to be so slow. And who wants a little, whatever, right? A go-kart when I can go sit in my Porsche 911 and, go 0 to whatever, 50 in 5 seconds. And then, of course, the Tesla Model S or the precursor came out, and they showed that not only could you have a great performance, but you can also do all these other good things like, for the environment. And now, obviously, I own a couple of Teslas. We won't talk about Mr. Musk at all, but at the same time, I own the Teslas because they are just better cars. So I think the electric revolution 15 years ago is similar to what I believe will happen in the financial markets when people realize that you can actually spend that premium and come out ahead with better returns over time.